For well over 100 years, these oyster dredgers, known as smacks, fished the seas off the Essex coast. In the 1920s, many were motorised, and some worked up until the 60s when they were replaced by modern boats. However, many of these gorgeous craft have been restored for pleasure use, and later I'll be off to Essex to see how it's done. In the workshop, I'm restoring a rather smaller wooden sailing boat, a Sharpie, but constructed virtually in the same way. Next job is to replace one of these floors. Now the floors are the large cross members that go across the boat, which bolt down to the keel and take the strain from the keel up into the rest of the boat. And the problem with this one is it's got a crack in the middle, and the two ends are actually, well, they've got some nasty repairs. So what we're going to do is put one alongside, which is called a doubler or a sister. So it'll be exactly the same, but we'll glue it and it'll make it a really nice strong job. So the first thing we need to do is just to measure the length of ply we need to make the pattern. In this case it's about 46.5 inches. Down to the floor there is about, oh, it's about 6 inches, isn't it? Oh, here we go, what's this one? 45.5, inch too short. Let's see how it looks. How does that look? Oh, it's an inch too short. It's a half an inch at each end, but that's okay. It's only a rough pattern. So the first thing to do is to make the pattern fit roughly. So I'm going to clamp it in position with using these ever so cheap market clips. 50p each, or 10 for a fiver. Then we just need something, anything that's about that depth. And we're going to get a nice big piece of chalk. And we're going to just run up like that, and the same on the other side. Let's see how that looks. That's good. It's got it. You've got to make sure it can't move. If your pattern moves whilst you're marking it off, it's a waste of time. And next we get a pencil and a dummy stick. Any parallel sided piece of timber will do, but this particular one has a handle. It's a proper little dummy stick. Pop him on there, and then push hard down with your sharp pencil. There we go. That last bit there, and then run around to the other side. As much information onto this pattern as you can, otherwise it's not worth having. Next job is find a piece of timber. And this offcut of oak should be ideal. Here's our pattern. Now this particular piece of timber, we want to miss out this piece of sap along one side, but also it's got a nice curve to the grain as well, so if we utilise that it'll make it stronger and it'll look nicer as well. So I'm going to position our pattern on top, see how it looks. Right, so leave it there. So we'll cramp it on so it can't move. Just put him down there. Right, so next job then is to just transfer these lines onto the timber itself so we can cut it out. When you're cutting with a bandsaw or any circular saw or jigsaw, cut as close as you can to the line. Otherwise there's absolutely no point being accurate at the patterning stage, and you'll just be forever shaving a bit off, shaving a bit off. So just mark it out, cut to the line, go for it. One other angle we need to cut is the angle of the end of this floor where it touches the side of the boat. So we get our sliding bevel up against the floor. Now this is one thing the pattern doesn't tell us, the angle of the taper of the boat. But a quick measurement with the sliding bevel does the trick. Right, what we've got here is what quite often happens in boats. In this case, the stringers, the inside faces are beveled in, and to get past, we've actually got to cut a bit off. Now we don't want to cut it off the stringer, but we'll have to lose the corner of our nicely patterned piece of oak. So using the finger gauge, infinitely flexible, always ready, very adjustable. truth. Well, that's not too bad, is it? Now, if we get a little piece of wood that we know is square because it's come off the machine, we hold it up against the floor and look at it, and we see that little tiny gap on the inside face. It's no more than a couple of millimetres. So really, if we take a couple of millimetres off this back face, so this edge here, then that should allow for the bevel of the shape of the boat, and it should fit snugly all the way across. This corrects the other thing the pattern can't tell us, the run or the slope of the bottom of the boat. Okay, so what we've got to do is just put a flat now between this little pencil line in here and this one, so that we get this little bevel put on there. But we want to try and keep little humps and the bumps. If we just put a plane straight over the top and make it nice and flat, it won't fit that boat because the planking on that boat is like the Himalayas. Luckily for us. Look at that. Better than the last one. That'll do. I'll finish off the floors later, because I'm off to Essex, home of the Smacks. We're in Brightlingsea in Essex on the last remaining part of the Aldous Shipyard, which in its heyday was known as the Smack Factory, where it churned out hundreds of these, Smacks. Now, Smack is the definitive East Coast working boat, and it was used for trawling and dredging for oysters and so on. This Smack Transcur has left its fishing days well behind it, and it's now a family boat.
It's a little bit different to how it would have been as she was a working boat. We have arranged things purely for comfort, but as a working boat, this main area that we're sitting beneath is where the fish hold would be, and that would have either been sprats or oysters, depending what she was doing at what time of the year. The aft cabin area behind you would have been for sails, gear, spare warps and bits and pieces like that. And further forward in the forecastle is where there would have been very, very basic rudimentary crew's quarters for the two crew. So that would have been the layout then, but as you can see now, the main saloon is sort of two berths with lots of stowage underneath. There's beer beneath that one. We've got water tanks under this one with a galley behind me. Behind the panelling here is the heads. We've just roughly fitted a temporary stove last winter to take some of the chill out. And being wood, it doesn't suffer from condensation. Friends' fiberglass boats in the winter start dripping everywhere, and it doesn't do that.
I see you've put battens on the hull now.
We put battens or slats along the hull, both here and in the forecastle, to help the boat breathe. I mean, it's terribly important that you keep air circulating in the boat and you don't trap stale air.
Your engine installation is quite an interesting one, isn't it? Because you've got one engine, but you've got two propellers.
It uses hydraulics with this engine driving a pump, which can then split into however many pipes you want and drive different units. And so mine splits from one engine into two drive units, so I can run two propellers. And I can then run them independently, one ahead, one astern. So theoretically, I should have the control of a modern motorboat. We were, I suppose, very fussy because what we wanted was something with lots of room, standing headroom, or nearly standing headroom, room for the children, and something which we could keep for a long time and that we could handle ourselves. And we first saw Transcur probably about 6 years ago. The boat was so rotten that anything that you touched was sort of falling apart. There were sort of patches of plywood nailed over on the deck. We had a good look at her and thought, well, yes, she's got lots of room, but she needs a total rebuild. And we eventually decided that she would do. We bought her and shipped her home, put her in the garden and started work. And that's when the really hard work started. We realised we bought just a pile of rotten timber and we would have to replace just about everything. In fact, at the end of the day, we probably kept about 12 pieces of the original wood. We used everything else as patterns, so we had her sitting there, all blocked up, 25 feet from the front door. And as we took a piece of wood off, we've got another piece of wood of a similar or the same type, cut it, fashioned it to the right shape, refitted it, and continued to do that. But I think the best thing we found is that since we've had the boat now finished and launched for a few months, that the way the children react on the boat, because she's got lovely wide open decks and tall bulwarks, there's a sense of being inside the boat and very secure. So it makes it ideal as a family cruising boat.
Well, it's very impressive. I mean, some people can spend twice that, 10 years, 15 years even doing the same size project.
I think most people can do an awful lot more if they actually have confidence in themselves to do it. If they actually try to do it, they can do it. But many people are just afraid of actually trying.
By the end of the 19th century, there were so many smacks fishing the Essex waters that bigger smacks were needed to fish further afield. These were known as first-class smacks, but by 1940 they had all but disappeared, and Pioneer, here in the 1940s, was abandoned, and over the next 50 years she slowly rotted into the mud. Why is Pioneer worth saving?
She's the pinnacle of Essex working sail, and the trade that they were involved with was the hardest and cruelest trade Essex man ever worked. The losses of life and limb were unimaginable in the 1870s, 1880s, and for it to be forgotten would be an injustice.
What did make it so dangerous?
Well, they were working in winter. They were working possibly between October and May, north of Holland, no engines. They were working probably 18 hours a day dredging, and just horrendous conditions.
So Rupert set up a charitable trust to lift the remains of Pioneer from the mud.
We didn't know whether the thing would hold together, whether it would break up, whether when we got it out it was just an old box and not a beautiful thing like it is.
Her remains were taken to Scripps Farm in Essex, where restoration began. And this is the result. What they did is they brought the whole boat in, they set it all up nice and plumb and nice and level, and they removed the keel, took that out, put a new keel in, and then bit by bit they took one frame out, put a new frame in, another frame out, until eventually it was ready for planking. It's been planked up, and there she is. Magic. 25 years after being built, Pioneer was lengthened. She was lengthened to include a wet well to keep the oysters fresh, because if you're going to sail further, then you've got to keep them alive for when you come back. And this is a bit of the section. This is one of the last sections left. This is on its side, okay? So this is the hull planking. This is the bulkhead that went across. Here are the lower decks that would have then gone up into the trunking, so the oysters would have come in from the top. It's covered in great things. You've got the holes here through the hull planking so the seawater could flow in and flow out and keep the oysters fresh with oxygen. You can see there's a keel bolt here coming through where the whole lot was spiked together as it was built. And it looks that over here there was a shaft went through here because in 1929 Pioneer had her first engine fitted. The engine was right at the front of the boat in the forecastle, and the propeller shaft ran right the way through this wet well, through this bearing here, and out the quarter of the boat. It was a wing propeller, and there it is, still in there. And it looks as though there is still, we've got one oyster shell here, look. And it's all these details on not only this piece of timber but the rest of the boat that have been faithfully reproduced on the new one. And it's information that you just couldn't get anywhere else. You've got to get that boat out of the mud and get everything off it you can to make a faithful reproduction. We're in the front of Pioneer, and you can see these beautiful, huge frames where each frame is made up of several pieces and then bolted together to give one large, strong frame. This is the mast step here, and you can see where the mast is going to come through the deck here, through these mast partners, down onto the mast step, and the heel of the mast is going to step into that mortise there. They've got so many nice details, right? Even the nuts here are square because they didn't have hexagonal nuts in 1864 when she was built. This is known as the ceiling, which is an internal lining to give strength. Even that is 1.5 inches thick. It's all big and strong and beautifully built. Now this is the wet well of the ship, and this is where the oysters would have been stored to keep them nice and fresh in seawater. The water line is up to about here, so there would have been trunkings coming up to the deck, and this would have been full of water with holes letting the water come in and out to keep the seawater fresh. Now this is interesting. This is the last remaining piece of Pioneer, and this is one floor here, which has been put in really for sentimentality's sake. It's not doing very much. This is down the back end of the boat. There's another hole through the deck here where the mizzen mast goes in. This is the counter, and then there's this little tiny tiller. Now all the planking is finished, the next job is to seal the gaps between the planks with oakum, known as caulking. So Jim, before you caulk up Pioneer, How do you prepare the oakum?
Well, the oakum comes into the country in bales like this, which are pretty compressed. And when you open them up, you've got little blocks come out of it. And each one is basically a compressed coil. And you take the end off, and it's like a big ribbon of really loosely woven fibres. And it's got all like bits of twig in it and sacking and all sorts of stuff. And then you've got to roll it and pick out all the pieces, because you can't put it in the seam just like that. It's got to be fairly neat, like a bit of string. So you tease out the fibres so they're all going the same direction and just gently roll it off.
So this must be quite a nice break from when you've been caulking away.
It is, yeah. I think it's where the term spinning yarns came from, because it's always good to do it with somebody else. Like Sean and I usually have a rolling break. You sort of sit there for an hour and roll some out, and then go back for a few more hours banging away.
First, the oakum is pushed into place, then using a mallet and a caulking iron, carefully hardened into the seams. So do you hold that iron in a special way?
If you hold it that way and you miss, you break your knuckles. So you always hold it that way, and then if you miss, you just brush off like that. Bits. Yeah, but hopefully you don't miss too much. And it's a lot easier to hold like that.
You've changed irons?
Yeah, I've changed from a really sharp one like a knife onto this one. It's got a slight groove in it, and that'll take the edges in nice and crisply. It's getting the pressure right. You don't want hard spots or soft spots, and also getting the depth right is the trick.
After the caulking's finished, each seam is primed again, and then the seam is stopped up with red lead putty, which is normal putty like you use in your windows, with red lead added as a preservative. It's then smoothed off to give you a nice smooth finish. Thanks to Rupert and his team, Britain will have a deep-sea oyster smack for at least another 100 years, and the legacy of our fishing past lives on. On a different scale, our classic racing Sharpies restoration is also coming along. Next job is just to cut off our excess before it's finally fitted down and glued and screwed into place. No, I'm never going to get in there. Oh, we might. Now you might think that we'd normally use a spoke shave here, but it's a shallow curve, and if you use the block plane at an angle, you can sort of just pick out the high spots. That's all right, isn't it? So you can see that this floor, although it's much, much smaller than Pioneer's, is still very, very important because it ties together the keel and the planks and the frames. So it's a very important piece of structure, really. Anyway, I better get on because I've got 2 more to do. I'll never go sailing at this rate. On this beautiful September morning, I've come to the Essex town of Maldon for their 200-year-old regatta to join the smack, My Alice. We're down below in My Alice, and My Alice is a smack, and by their very nature, they're very, very low in order to be able to work over the side of the boat and pull the nets and the trawls out of the water. This means the only place you can stand up is here. The interior is quite simple. There's a huge galley there, a couple of berths on each side, but plenty of floor area. And down here you can also see the ballast. This ballast is actually made up out of 8 tons of lead and about a ton of concrete. The concrete holds the lead into the boat, and the ballast is spread not only in the bottom but actually up the sides, and this gives the boat a much nicer motion when she's out in a heavy sea. Now here in the back of the boat, there's something missing. Although Jim, the owner, is a marine engineer, this boat is exactly as she's built, and there's no engine. This made getting to the start of the race interesting. There's no wind, you see. So if you haven't got an engine, there's no wind, then you've got a row. While we waited for the starting gun, Jim filled me in on the history of My Alice.
She was one of the last smacks, if not the last smack, to still be working but under motor around at Pagglesham on the Roach for Pagglesham Oyster Company. And then she was laid up for quite a few years, sort of half sunk.
Yeah.
for someone to want to do a raft.
Waiting for a man possessed. The first job for trainee crew member Patrick is lubricating the boom with tallow so it moves freely.
This is going to win the race for us, I think.
So the race starts, and with virtually no wind, every sail we have is up. We've been given the course to take, and that means the wind's going to be behind us, so we've got almost a running start. So we're going to get the sails right out on each side of the boat, boomed out with this pole, and get the big sail up. This regatta is typical of those that took place in the East Coast fishing towns in the 1800s. The oyster season runs from October till April, so in the summer the fishermen raced each other in their smacks. Not only was this fun for the sailors, but it was also advertising how quickly they could get their catch back to the markets. The boat in front there, LO 178, is actually slightly different from the one behind. It's a bally, and they're distinguishable by the fact they've got no boom on the mainsail. It made it much easier to work the decks and so on without that boom clobbering your head. Now they came from the Port of London, hence the LO on the sail. The name bally comes from the word boiler because they were shrimpers. They go out, trawl for shrimps, and on the way back up, they'd cook the shrimps in a big copper boiler and boil them up ready for the fish markets when they got home. They used to be regarded as quite slow, however a couple of them have been restored, including this one, and you can see it's doing rather well. Have you always had an interest in smacks?
Yeah, I've been smack sailing since I was about 10, I suppose. Age of 10 onwards, I went sort of smack sailing and I started looking for a smack when I was about 20. I knew this one was there up around the back of Mersey in a sort of really dilapidated condition, but the guy wouldn't part with it. So it sort of took a bit of persuasion. Eventually we managed to get it out of him. Yeah. Then took it back up the yard and rebuilt it.
And it's ironic, you being a marine engineer, that you have no engine in your boat.
Yeah, I mean, there's always in the back of my mind that one day I'll put one in there if we want to go off somewhere. You know, just myself and my wife, but I've spent 20 years sailing these boats, but never skippered them. So the only way to learn to sail it is to have to sail it. You know what I mean? Yeah. If you've got an engine, every time you get into a bit of a problem, you sort of turn the key and motor yourself out of trouble. Jib top's all good.
It's really quiet on board. There's not a lot of wind, so we're just drifting along really nicely. But this is still hardcore racing. In the end, we didn't win, but who cares? It's just great to be out there, sailing one of these fine historical boats.